Hey, it's week 8 of fantasy football, and we're looking for those wide receivers that are going to catch more balls than a massage therapist for the New England Patriots at this point. Some tough matchups, some tough calls to make. Who are you starting? Who are you sitting? We're talking about it right now. What's going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you guys are all doing well out there. Welcome back to the Draft.com studios, where today, talking about them ball catchers. Yep, that's right. Fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for week 8. And you may have to make some tough decisions this week. There's some matchups that you may not really want to be a part of. Who are some of those names? We're going to get to them here in just a second, but just a reminder, giving away $1,000 on October 31st. What's crazy about it is I know people are watching this video, but they just don't seem to have the interest in winning free money. If you like free money or the opportunity to win free money, the link is down below in the description. All it's going to do is take you to another video. You leave a comment on that video and you're entered to win. No catch, no fine print, no purchase necessary. Just a way to get entered to win $1,000. But now, let's get into the week 7 numbers. Let's see how we did at the wide receiver position last week and see if we can improve upon it here this week. Given the craziness that was week 7, a pretty solid week, we had a total of 53 wide receivers who completed their game here this week that we gave a start or sit designation to. Out of those 53, 32 were correct hits for an accuracy percentage of 60%. Some of our biggest hits, Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. A lot of people hopped off that bandwagon. Still like Allen Robinson. Stephon Diggs had himself another solid day, yes, partially because of the injury to Adam Thielen. John Brown of the Buffalo Bills, he had himself a great week. Cortland Sutton, he's really becoming a weekly must-start at this point. The consistency is really there right now for Cortland Sutton. Some of our misses, Marvin Jones, by far. I don't know if anybody saw 4 touchdowns coming, but it is great to see that Matthew Stafford remembers that he's on his team. MVS, the dude barely practiced all week long, came out there and had himself a great week 7. Zach Pascal really liked T.Y. Hilton a lot last week. Well, T.Y. still had a solid game, but some of that ceiling, some of that upside was limited because of Zach Pascal and his great week. Also, Alex Erickson. I don't know if anybody started Alex Erickson. Heck, I'll be shocked if a lot of people even know who he is. Not somebody who's going to do that on a weekly basis, but once again, somebody we missed on, had himself a huge week 7. But now, let's go ahead and get into these matchups here for week 8 and find out who we starting and sitting for the wide receiver position. All right, Thursday Night Football got the Redskins and the Vikings, and you've lost your love in Thielen for the week, that's for sure. There is no Adam Thielen here for week 8. He's been ruled out. So what do we do with Stephon Diggs? Well, we start him because of the added volume and because of the matchup going up against the Redskins, who allow, on average, 25 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That's 9th most in the NFL. Plus, there's a chance that there's no Josh Norman. Not that that really matters, because Josh Norman's really sucked to begin the beginning of the season, but that just adds to the reasons to start Stephon Diggs. 3 times already, this Washington secondary has been lit up by an opposing wide receiver and allowed more than 25 fantasy points in PPR formats to an opposing wide receiver. Like myself, some Stephon Diggs here in week 8. But also, another name that I don't have on the graphic. I talked about him in the waiver wire show, though. It's Olabisi Johnson for all you deep league players. That's who's going to be assuming the number 2 role now with Adam Thielen out. He's had 13 receptions over the last 4 weeks and is someone who's already involved in this offense, but now he gets a little bit more of an opportunity. So if you're looking for a sneaky play, Olabisi Johnson is your dude. Now, for the Redskins, it's a little bit different, more difficult of a matchup for them on paper. But this secondary, the Minnesota Vikings, got absolutely annihilated by Marvin Jones last week. So who gets to play Marvin Jones this week? Paul Richardson or Terry McLaurin? I mean, I want to be somewhat sneaky and say that Paul Richardson is the guy, but he's only had 5 fantasy points in the last 4 weeks combined. Do you really want to start that guy and take that chance? I really don't. Personally, I'd rather risk it and go with Terry McLaurin. He's had 7 targets in all but 1 week, which was just last week. He's had 5 touchdowns in 6 games, and both Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes are giving up over 12 fantasy points per game to their opposing wide receiver. If you go to the end of the week and Terry McLaurin ends up with 12 fantasy points, more likely than not, you're going to be okay with that with some of the options you have out there. He's a solid flex option here in week 8. Paul Richardson, I want to. It's just too much of a risk. Seahawks and Falcons up now. Biggest question mark here. Does Matt Ryan play? And if he doesn't, how much does that affect Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley? I can't see them throwing Matt Ryan out there in basically a lost season and risking further injury. I don't see that happening. I expect Matt Schaub to start. But right now, Seattle's only given up just under 19 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, which is 8th best in the NFL. But we can't totally sleep on Matt Schaub. He's not horrible. He's a long-time backup that has started in this league before. He started 3 full seasons with the Houston Texans in the past, and in all 3 of those seasons, he threw for over 4,000 yards. I do expect him to somewhat lock onto the likes of Julio Jones and maybe even Austin Hooper. What I'm worried about is Calvin Ridley may be big play touchdown dependent here, and in that risky situation, I don't know if I want to take that risk here in Week 8. Julio Jones, though, the volume should be there, the targets should be there. In a decent matchup, I expect to see a lot of Julio Jones and a lot of Devontae Freeman in this running game. They can't run the whole game. They're going to have to throw it. Julio Jones will be the receiver of all those targets. I'm going to stick with Julio Jones this week, but Calvin Ridley, a little bit too much of a risk here for my liking in Week 8. Now for the Seahawks, if you have Tyler Lockett, you're going to start Tyler Lockett. I mean, right now the Atlanta Falcons give up the 5th most points to opposing wide receivers at just over 28 fantasy points per game. Tyler Lockett's had 10-plus fantasy points 6 out of 7 weeks. He's somebody who's going to be in your lineup. But what about DK Metcalf? He's coming off a career high in targets where he had 9 targets last week in Week 7. But we know he's kind of deep ball dependent. But here's what we also do know. The Atlanta Falcons have allowed 28 plays over 20 yards or more, the 3rd most in the NFL. Heck, they've allowed 5 plays of 40 yards or more, which is 5th most in the NFL. I'm rolling the dice this week. I'm throwing out DK Metcalf as a flex option. I think the big play upside is going to be there. Broncos and Colts up next, and no more Emmanuel Sanders. It's now the Courtland Sutton show. He may get a slight bump in volume, but it also bumps up Deshaun Hamilton, who expects to slide into that number 2 wide receiving role. But for right now, it's all about Courtland Sutton, the most consistent option and who I want to start in this offense. He hasn't had a game yet this year in which he didn't see at least 7 targets. And also, the Colts, they allow 25 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And here's a fun stat. Every time here in 2019 that the Colts have allowed 7 targets or more to an opposing wide receiver, that wide receiver has not finished lower than wide receiver 26 on the week. He's going to see the volume. Now, before I throw in Deshaun Hamilton, let's see how they really distribute these targets by no more Emmanuel Sanders before we just make that assumption that it's Deshaun Hamilton and throw him into a lineup. More than likely, he's available on most waiver wires. You stash him on the bottom of the bench. He may have value second half of the season, but not somebody I'm looking at here for Week 8. For the Colts, I'm a little worried about T.Y. Hilton here this week, and not so much just T.Y. Hilton himself, but the matchup against Chris Harris, who's only allowing 7.4 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. I mean, he is a shutdown corner, but Denver as a whole has allowed 18.8 fantasy points per game. Look what they did to Tyreek Hill last week. They basically shut him down other than that big play late in the game. Chris Harris has shut down the likes of Keenan Allen, DJ Chark, Devontae Adams, Allen Robinson. All those guys limited to single digits here this season. That's what has me worried about T.Y. Hilton this week. Now, I'm going to sit T.Y. Hilton. I'm going to get a lot of questions. Well, what about Zach Pascal? Can I start him instead? If you're in a deeper league looking for a flex play, maybe you have 3 wide receivers or you start multiple flex spots, then he becomes an option, I think, because I think a lot of the attention on the offensive side of the ball is going to go towards Zach Pascal if T.Y. Hilton can't get free from Chris Harris. Just something to pay attention to. Got T.Y. Hilton in the sit column here for Week 8. Bucks and Titans up next, and there's finally a passing game alive and well in Tennessee. And it's because Ryan Tannehill is now under center, and he gets the matchup going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are currently giving up 29 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Plus, it's a tough run defense for the Tampa Bay Bucks. They're going to have to throw the ball to find success in Tennessee. That's going to open up more opportunities for Corey Davis and A.J. Brown down the field. Now, every time there's been a wide receiver that's seen over 6 targets this season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they've all hit double-digit fantasy points. Now, both Davis and Brown last week saw over 6 targets apiece. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw them both in the flex spot here for the week. I think they both have that potential, but there is some risk involved with them. However, I mentioned this also in the waiver wire video. This could be a great opportunity that if you have Corey Davis and he does perform well this week, that you can flip him and sell him for the highest value you could possibly get, because that's going to be 2 back-to-back games that he's had solid fantasy days, and you can sell it on the fact that Ryan Tannehill is going to be his quarterback going forward. just something to throw out there. But both these guys this week, I'm going to play as a flex spot if needed. Now, on the Tampa Bay side of things, it's hard to remove either Mike Evans or Chris Godwin from your lineup, right? I mean, especially Chris Godwin. He's been so consistent all season long. Mike Evans, kind of been a little bit of a roller coaster, but right now, week 6, I hope they don't forget how they use these guys against the Carolina Panthers. These two guys combined for 29 targets between the two of them. Now, Tennessee is 6th best against opposing wide receivers, giving up only 18 fantasy points per game, but Godwin's going to remain a weekly must-start. You can't sit him on your bench. Hopefully, they commit to this passing game, and they really utilize both of these guys this week. I'm not going to sit Evans. I'm not going to sit Godwin. It's a difficult matchup, but I think that they're going to have to throw the ball this week in Tampa Bay, and hopefully they can get that volume that they saw before the bye week. Cardinals and Saints up next, and Larry Fitzgerald's had a great opportunity the past couple of weeks to really do some damage with no Christian Kirk and in some good matchups, but he hasn't really done anything with them. Now, we still don't know if Christian Kirk's going to be back or not this week, but it's something we need to pay attention to closely. Both of these guys have flex appeal here for week 8. Right now, the Saints give up on average over 26 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and they're a very tough run defense. There may be no David Johnson. The Cardinals have gone out and signed Zach Zenner, Alfred Morris. We already know about Chase Edmonds, but if they struggle on the ground, they're going to have to rely on their passing game, which they do a lot anyway. Right now, Kyler Murray is 6th in the NFL in pass attempts for the season. All we need to do, monitor the status of Christian Kirk. They're not going to put him back on the field until he's ready to go. So if he's active, both of these guys are decent flex options. For the Saints, though, I mean, it's really simple, right? You're starting Michael Thomas, and it's a difficult matchup maybe for him. He's going up one-on-one against Patrick Peterson. Now, they've only played against each other one time in the past. In that game, Michael Thomas only had 52 receiving yards, but he did manage to get a touchdown, so there's still that upside there. And they've really started to open up this offense a little bit more. There's some rumors going around that saying, hey, Drew Brees may start. I don't know if they really need him to. That just may be a ploy to maybe troll the Cardinals and what they did with us with David Johnson last week. Why rush back Drew Brees when the Saints are winning games with Teddy Bridgewater going up against an Arizona Cardinals team? I don't see them rushing back Drew Brees. Those reports are going to be out there, so make sure you pay attention to it. But either way, Michael Thomas is going to remain in the start column. Bengals and Rams up next, and everybody wants to know what's going on with Tyler Boyd. I mean, he's been bad the last couple of weeks, and I get that, but a lot of people, they're so quick just to look at the final box scores or, how many fantasy points did he give me, and then just come to the conclusion that the guy sucks. He really doesn't suck. I mean, he's seen 10-plus targets in all but 2 games this season, and just because he's seeing the targets doesn't mean that they're catchable. Don't forget, if a quarterback throws the ball out of bounds, if he throws it at the feet, if he delivers a bad pass, whichever wide receiver is closest to that pass gets credit for a target, whether he was able to catch it or not. So far on the season, Tyler Boyd has seen 73 targets. However, only 57 of them have been catchable. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, he's struggled with dropping the ball at times, and that's not helping his case whatsoever. And it may sound like I'm, lobbying for a start of Tyler Boyd. I'm not. I'm actually going to sit Tyler Boyd this week. The bad offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals going up against that defensive front of the Los Angeles Rams is going to create all kinds of havoc for Andy Dalton, which could lead in uncatchable targets this week. Plus, more than likely, he's going to have to deal with one Jalen Ramsey, now a member of the Rams. Auden Tate, unless you're in a super deep league with multiple flex spots, he's a decent option, but not somebody who I'm really looking at right here in Week 8. For the Rams, it's kind of hard to sit any of these guys, right? I mean, Cincinnati has a decent pass defense against opposing wide receivers, but Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Brandon Cooks all have huge upside, especially with them going back home and playing in LA. Now, Cooks, a little bit more of a flex play because he's been inconsistent, but Kupp and Woods, 2 guys, I have no issue starting here in Week 8. Eagles and Bills up next, and on paper, this looks like a pretty difficult matchup for the Philadelphia Eagles. Buffalo's only allowing 16 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, which is second best in the NFL. However, their last 2 games have been against Miami and the Tennessee Titans. Not exactly juggernauts in the passing game, so that slightly skews these numbers. Now, Tre'Davious White, he's the real deal, though. He's only allowing 8 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And more than likely, Alshon could struggle at times against Tre'Davious White and be a little bit more big play dependent. But he's still going to see the targets. Why are they going to throw the ball so much to Alshon Jeffrey? It's because Nelson Aguilar's hands must be this long because the guy can't catch anything outside of his body. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. That was a very catchable ball if you haven't seen the clip yet. He made almost little to no effort on it, and he's done that in the past. I really don't understand why, whether he's worried or whether he thought a safety was over the top. Whatever it was, he didn't make an effort for that ball, and eventually he's going to lose the trust of Carson Wentz. Alshon Jeffrey may be the main benefactor of that, and I expect him to see a lot of targets this week, so I'll go ahead and start Alshon Jeffrey. Now, for the Buffalo Bills side of things, I still like John Brown a lot, but why do I like John Brown so much? Well, the Eagles give up on average 32 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, the most in the league, so it's a great matchup. Right now, John Brown is averaging 10 fantasy points per game. He's had 8 targets per game every single week. I mean, Cole Beasley is another one of these guys who has opportunities this week. More of a full-point PPR option or a flex play at best. The upside may not be there as high for Cole Beasley, but in a matchup against a secondary that gives up so many points, I have no issues starting either one of these guys here this week. Chargers and Bears up next, and at least we can say this about Keenan Allen. At least he saw 11 targets last week. I mean, that's a positive. That's a trend in the right direction, at least. I mean, he hasn't had 10 fantasy points since week 3. Hasn't had any more than 5 receptions a game since week 3 either. I mean, I really don't understand what's going on. I mean, I know the return of Hunter Henry has taken away some targets. Mike Williams is another guy who's seen double-digit targets 2 out of the last 3 games. But right now, the Bears only allow 17 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Keenan's kind of gone from a must-start wide receiver 1 talent kind of down to that wide receiver 2 level. His value right now, a little bit too low to trade, so if you have him, you're kind of just stuck starting him here this week. And the same goes for Mike Williams. Like I said, he's had 10-plus targets 2 out of the last 3 games, but he's more of a flex option at this point until the offense of the Chargers can really figure out what's going on and turn things back into the right direction. Now, for the Chicago Bears, I still like Allen Robinson. I've liked Allen Robinson all year long. I didn't ever expect to see Mitch Trubisky throw the ball 50-plus times in a game, but Allen Robinson is the clear number 1. Last week, he saw 16 targets. That's the type of volume I want in a wide receiver because he gives me that opportunity for those touchdowns and for those double-digit receiving games. Right now, the Chargers give up over 20 fantasy points per game, and he's the only wide receiver that I feel comfortable right now starting for the Bears. Giants and Lions up next, and there's really only one name we're talking about for the Giants. It's going to be Golden Tate, who I'm going to start against his former team this week, the Detroit Lions. Now, the Lions give up on average 23 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and Tate is clearly the number 1 option for the Giants. There's no Sterling Shepard. Evan Ingram's been banged up at times. Inconsistent targets going the way of one Darius Slayton, the rookie. Tate moving in and out of the slot, really giving him that opportunity for 10-plus targets a week is enough for me to put him here in the start column here, week 8. Now, for the Lions, it was great to see that Matthew Stafford all of a sudden realized that Marvin Jones was a wide receiver on his team. I mean, he hadn't really looked his way very much beginning of the season. Coming into week 7, Jones only had a total of 20 receptions and 1 touchdown. Last week in week 7, he had 10 receptions and 4 touchdowns. Now, obviously, that's not sustainable. That's not something we can count on a weekly basis, but it's a great matchup for them going up against the New York Giants, who give up on average 26 fantasy points per game. That's 8th most in the NFL. We know there's no Kerryon Johnson. Ty Johnson will be the running back there for the Detroit Lions with J.D. McKissick. Maybe they have to lean a little bit more on the passing game. Maybe not expecting huge numbers from either one of these guys, but both of them have that safe floor that I'm willing to risk it for both Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones this week as starts here for me in week 8. Jets and Jags up next, and apparently Sam Darnold spent more time seeing Casper the Ghost than his wide receivers last week because it was a rough week, but this is a lot better matchup going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars here in week 8. They give up on average 23 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and we already know there's no more Jalen Ramsey here. Now, Demaryius Thomas and Robbie Anderson both have some sneaky value here, but let's wait until after week 7 before we really start determining who the safest guy is going forward. If I had to pick one here for this week, I think the safer floor goes to Demaryius Thomas. Robbie Anderson saw the targets, just couldn't connect on the deep ball, and that's really where he makes his money. He's a high-risk, high-reward player. he's going to go out there and he's going to get you hardly anything, or he's going to get you 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it's just the type of player that Robbie Anderson is. He's not that consistent, but maybe moving forward with this easier schedule, he becomes somebody who we can throw into our lineups here going forward. Now, for the Jaguars side of things, and I'm going to spend a minute here because last week I got probably the most hate I've ever gotten on one take, and it was about DJ Chark. There was tons of hater comments. Heck, one of the hater comments actually had 100 likes and 30 comments with people agreeing with the person. I've never seen that before here on this channel, and I really don't understand why. It's all because I said DJ Chark was touchdown dependent. And he somewhat is. I mean, it's not like I'm saying the guy isn't talented. He just doesn't see those games where he's going to go out there and maybe get you 8 catches for 80 yards and still give you that safe floor, 12 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. If he goes out there and he doesn't score the touchdown, more than likely he's getting 4 catches for 50 yards and you're getting like 7 fantasy points. That's the only issue I had with DJ Chark. It's nothing against his talent. Heck, I've been more of a supporter of DJ Chark since the Combine last year. If you really want to, if you're bored, you can go back to this channel's videos last year after the Combine, and I believe I listed DJ Chark as one of the top wide receivers in that draft. I love the kid. I'm just spitting facts that the guy is somewhat touchdown dependent. And did he go out there and get that touchdown last week? No, he didn't. And he only ended up with 7 or 8 fantasy points. That's what you can consider, on a week-to-week basis for DJ Chark. I don't hate the guy. Now, obviously, that thread, it got really quiet after the game was played. It's kind of funny how that happens. But in the 3 games that DJ Chark has played this season in which he did not have a touchdown, he averages 7 fantasy points per game. But now it's a better matchup going up against the Jets, who give up on average 22 fantasy points a game. A matchup that I like a lot more for not just him, but D.D. Westbrook. I like both of these guys as flex plays here this week. They have that upside. It's a little bit of a better matchup, in my opinion, for DJ Chark. I would not be surprised to see him get into the end zone this week, and that's what we're looking for on a weekly basis. D.D. Westbrook, not so much the touchdown upside, the volume. He needs the volume. He needs to go out there and get you those double-digit targets to return on his weekly investment into your lineup. So if you're looking for another solid flex play, D.D. Westbrook, just another option. Panthers and Niners up next, and this one's going to be a quick one. None of the wide receivers for the San Francisco 49ers are consistent enough to start on a weekly basis. Now, I don't have Emmanuel Sanders listed here on the graphic, but he'd more than likely be in the sit column for his first week anyway. He's not going to be in town for very long. Maybe going forward, that's somebody that we can start looking at here in this offense. But as of right now, Dante Pettis, Deebo Samuel, Marquise Goodwin, none of them are consistent enough to be a start on a weekly basis. But like I said, after this week, then we can start talking Emmanuel Sanders. For Carolina, this is a pretty tough matchup right now. San Francisco only allows 17.2 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That's 4th best in the NFL. We know Kyle Allen still under center, no Cam Newton, but I really don't like this matchup. There's very limited upside here for DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. They're coming off their bye week. Hopefully you have other options on your roster that can get you by another week, because if at all possible, I'd like to sit both of these guys. They're going to be very, very big play dependent. If they don't get that big play, they're going to kill your fantasy day, and that's what I'm worried about. I have them both in the sit column. Raiders and Texans up first, and this is a great matchup for the wide receivers of the Oakland Raiders. Right now, the Texans giving up on average 28.4 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That's 4th most in the league. But who can we really trust here for the Raiders? Does Tyrell Williams play this week? He's back at practice. There's a chance that he does. It's something we need to pay attention to. Is Zay Jones finally active for the Raiders? Can we trust Trevor Davis? I mean, in my opinion, unless Tyrell Williams plays, there's too much risk with all of those other names at this point. So obviously, if Tyrell Williams is sitting, I'm going to avoid everybody here for the Oakland Raiders, even though it's a great matchup. Let's keep our fingers crossed, because if Tyrell Williams is active, he's somebody you want to have in your lineup. Now for Houston, you're obviously going to start DeAndre Hopkins. He's now had 2 straight weeks with at least 9 receptions, and Oakland gives up on average 29.5 fantasy points per game, 2nd most in the NFL. That also makes me really kind of like Kenny Stills a little bit here this week, especially with no Will Fuller once again. Stills has double-digit games in 3 out of the 5 that he's played here with the Houston Texans. Now, he doesn't need to have that high volume either. He doesn't have to go out there and get 10 catches a week to give you a solid floor. No, he can get you a great day with 3 or 4 catches, big chunks of yardage, a great opportunity. I'm going to start Kenny Stills also along with DeAndre Hopkins here in Week 8. Browns and Patriots up next. Now, if you watched my running back video, you know that I said to start Nick Chubb here against the Patriots. But I'm a realist. I know that this is an elite defense for the New England Patriots, and I know the Browns could really struggle here this week. They are coming off the bye week. Hopefully they're well rested, and hopefully they had time to really get things back on track for this offense. But this is not the week to start everybody and find out if they've figured it out. The Patriots only allow on average 13.5 fantasy points per game. Gilmore and McCourty playing out of their mind there in the secondary. These are bold calls right here, but I'm going to sit both Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. Both of those guys are going to be on my benches. I do not want to trust it this week. They were on buys last week. Hopefully you have other options here this week. In my opinion, it's just not worth the risk if you have safer plays. Now, for New England, insert Mohamed Sanu, right? Maybe not right into your lineup, but now they get another weapon in this offense. I want to give it another week, though, before I really trust starting Mohamed Sanu going in there midweek. Let's give him a week with Tom Brady in this offense before we really expect a whole lot out of him. Plus, there's a lot of options there for Tom Brady and a lot for Mohamed Sanu to compete with. You have Julian Edelman, Philip Dorsett, Jacoby Myers. I mean, now they've added Ben Watson into the mix a little bit. There's a lot of options in this offense. And heck, don't forget about James White soaking up a lot of targets too. I'm going to be on the Mohamed Sanu bandwagon here pretty soon. Not so much in week 8. In my opinion, Julian Edelman's still the safest play in this offense. And if I had to choose another piece here this week to insert into my lineup, it's going to have to be Philip Dorsett. He's been the next most consistent wide receiver in this offense. He's who I would also go as a flex play if needed. A lot of options coming up here for New England. They're already the best team in the NFL, and they just keep getting better. Packers and Chiefs up now, and what is life going to be like with no Patrick Mahomes for the Kansas City Chiefs? I mean, the guy actually took part in practice here, just the throwing part, but still, they can't be serious about possibly putting him in the game. They haven't ruled him out yet this week, which is absolutely crazy. It's more than likely they're playing chess with each other, but come on. The guy dislocated his kneecap last week. He shouldn't be playing football this week, especially when he already had a bum ankle to begin with. Give the guy some rest. But it was really hard to figure out what wide receivers to use in Kansas City, even with Patrick Mahomes. The ceilings were so huge, but they were so inconsistent from a week-to-week basis. So we're going to do what we always do. We're just going to stick with Tyreek Hill at this time, especially with Matt Moore under center. Now, he may be somewhat big play dependent, but that big play saved his fantasy day last week, and that's what we're hoping for once again here in Week 8 going up against the Packers. So what do we do for the Packers? That's the next question. Well, who's healthy for the Packers? First of all, let's start there. Devontae Adams, does he come back? We still don't know. Not practicing. I mean, it could be more time for Devontae Adams. It's really kind of unknown right now. Last week, MVS really didn't even practice most of the week. Came out and had a solid game on Sunday, including a big touchdown run that gave him a very big game. Now, what can we really expect here this week? Well, the Chiefs only allowed 20.2 fantasy points per game, but anybody outside of Adams or MVS, they're all too risky and inconsistent for my liking. So I'll start MVS this week. Now, obviously, if Devontae Adams comes back, he's going to be in the start column also. If not, I'm only rolling with MVS on the Packers side of things and leaving all the risk to somebody else. Monday Night Football, we got the Dolphins and the Steelers, and come on, Juju, we need you this week. Now, the Miami Dolphins give up on average 26.8 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Mason Rudolph back under center. There's a chance that James Washington also comes back this week. But what about Deontay Johnson? He was another one of the favorite targets of Mason Rudolph when he played a few weeks ago. In fact, in all 4 games that Mason Rudolph started, either Juju or Deontay Johnson had a touchdown in those games. Those are the 2 guys that we're going to focus on here this week. Those are the guys that, honestly, I'll put in my lineup. I'll start Deontay Johnson as a flex play in deeper leagues, and I'll throw Juju in the lineup going up against the Miami Dolphins. We kind of saw it a little bit last week with Cole Beasley and John Brown. This is going to be a little bit better of a situation than that. So I'm going to start both of those guys. Deontay Johnson, more of a flex play at best. Now, for the Miami Dolphins, we know Fitzmagic is out there slinging it. That's kind of what he does. But Pittsburgh gives up 22.3 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And right now, Fantasy Bigfoot kind of seems like the most consistent, which I've never thought I would say, option for the Miami Dolphins. He has touchdowns 3 straight weeks, and he did have 10 targets last week also. I like Preston Williams. He just hasn't shown enough consistency from a week-to-week basis to really trust him in a lineup as of yet. But if you're looking for a flex play, the first time ever on this show, Devontae Parker's an option? All right, those are all my starts and sits here. Week 8 fantasy football for the wide receiver position. What do you think about all these ball catchers? Who you starting? Who you sitting? Leave a comment down below. Let this community full of a lot of people really try to help you make the best decisions possible. Remember, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm trying to supply some perspective to really help those decisions that you have on game day, make them be a little bit easier. That's what we're trying to do here. Really appreciate the support. Make sure you guys have a great rest of your week. Good luck this weekend, and we'll talk to you later.